Every fall, a lot of us do the same two things and never once connect them. We rake up the year's prunings and fallen branches into a pile and we burn it. And then a few months later, when summer sets in, we're out there most evenings, dragging a hose around, trying to keep the garden from wilting in the heat. Burn the wood in October, buy the water in July. I did exactly that for years and never thought the two had a thing to do with each other. There's an old idea that says they do, that the wood you're burning could be doing the watering for you. It comes out of Central Europe, and it carries a German name that sounds a good deal fancier than the thing itself. Hügelkultur, Hügel culture. All it means is mound culture. And the whole idea is this: instead of burning that wood, you bury it and you plant on top of the mound. As the wood breaks down under the soil, it soaks up water like a sponge and feeds the plants above it for years. Now, you've likely run into this one online, and if you have, you've seen it oversold. I've watched videos promising it'll end drought in your backyard, grow lemons in the snow, and let you never water or fertilize again. So let me do what I always try to do here: separate the part that's real and useful from the part that's been dressed up to keep you watching. Because there is a genuinely good idea buried in here. It just isn't a miracle, and I won't pretend otherwise. The fellow most people credit with this is an Austrian mountain farmer named Sepp Holzer. He's a real man, still written about today, and he built wood-cored mounds and terraces on a steep farm high in the Alps, up around 4,000 to 5,000 feet, where the growing is genuinely hard. And he did grow things up there you wouldn't expect: cherries, kiwis, even some fruit you'd normally only see much farther south. He earned the nickname the Rebel Farmer, partly because he kept getting fined by the authorities for doing things his own way, digging ponds without permits, refusing to prune his trees the standard way. Some of that is true and well recorded. But here's where I want to be careful, because the story usually gets told wrong, and it's the wrong part that goes viral. You'll hear that his citrus survived the alpine winter because the rotting logs underground kept the soil warm, a buried furnace under the snow. That's not really what was happening. The people who've actually studied his farm point somewhere else. He dug big ponds that bounced sunlight back onto his slopes. He used rock and stone that soaked up heat by day and gave it back at night, and he laid his terraces to catch the sun. That's what nudged his little pockets of ground into a warmer zone than the mountain around them. The buried wood did real work, holding water and building soil, but the logs as a heater keeping citrus alive in the snow part is mostly a good story. I'd rather you know that walking in. And that's actually the more useful lesson hiding inside his story, so let me pull it out for you, because you can use it. What Holzer really mastered wasn't the wood, it was microclimate. He understood that a garden isn't one single climate. It's a patchwork of little pockets, some warmer, some colder, some wetter, all within a few feet of each other. A south-facing slope, a spot tucked against a stone wall, a bed beside water that throws the afternoon sun back at it. Each of those runs a little warmer than the open ground right next to it. He stacked those small advantages on purpose until he'd built pockets that behaved like they belonged a few hundred miles farther south. You can borrow that exact thinking without living on a mountain. If you've got a warm, sheltered corner, the south side of a fence, a spot that catches the low winter sun, a place near a big rock, or a paved path that holds the day's heat, that's where a tender plant has its best shot. Put your mound there, and you've stacked two good things together: the wood underneath handling the water, and the sunny, sheltered spot handling the warmth. That's a genuine edge, and it costs you nothing but paying attention to your own yard for a season to learn where those warm pockets already are. Most gardens have one or two. Most of us have just never gone looking. So let's talk about what the wood actually does, and start with water, because for most of us that's the real prize. When wood sits buried and damp, fungi and microbes go to work on it, and as it breaks down it turns soft and porous, full of little pockets. Rotted wood genuinely holds a lot of water. Anybody who's picked up a punky old log out of the woods knows it comes up heavy and wet long after the last rain. Bury enough of it under a bed, and you've built yourself a reservoir that fills when it rains and gives the water back slowly through a dry stretch. Now I'll be straight with you about the evidence, because you deserve it. You'll see very precise numbers thrown around, that decayed wood holds 5 times its weight in water, that a mound sits at some exact moisture percentage in the heat of July. I went looking for the studies behind those figures, and the honest truth is there's very little formal research on Hügelkultur and almost no proper side-by-side trials. The mechanism makes good sense, and plenty of gardeners report their beds coasting through dry weeks that would have had them out with a hose every night. I believe them, and I'd expect it to work. But when somebody hands you a number that precise like it walked straight out of a laboratory, be a little skeptical. Most of those figures are somebody's guess wearing a lab coat. What I can tell you plainly is this: a well-built wood-cored bed usually needs a good deal less watering once it's had a year or two to soak up and settle. That much is real, and it's worth a lot. The second thing people claim is that the wood feeds your plants for 20 years with no fertilizer. There's something to that, but it comes with a catch. And that catch is the single most important thing in this whole video. So whatever you do, don't skip it. Wood breaks down slowly. Hardwood like oak or maple can take the better part of 2 decades to fully rot. And as it goes, it does release nutrients and build a rich, living soil around itself. That slow feeding is real, and it's why folks get years out of a single mound. But here's what trips up nearly everyone who tries this and gives up. Fresh wood is hungry for nitrogen. When you first bury it, the microbes breaking it down pull nitrogen out of the surrounding soil to do their work, and that's the very same nitrogen your vegetables were counting on. This isn't folklore, it's well documented. In that first season, plants in a brand new mound can go pale and stunted, not because the method failed, but because the wood is temporarily robbing the pantry. The fix is simple, and it's the whole difference between this working and not working. When you build the mound, you pack all the gaps between the logs with nitrogen-rich green material, grass clippings, fresh manure, kitchen scraps, spent coffee grounds. That gives the microbes their own nitrogen to feed on, so they leave your plant's share alone. And that first year, you plant up top in a good thick layer of compost and topsoil, and you keep some fertilizer within reach in case the leaves start yellowing on you. After a year or two, the tables turn. The wood stops taking nitrogen and starts giving it back, and from then on, the bed mostly feeds itself. Skip that green packing though, and you'll get the pale, sad plants and decide the whole thing's a fraud. It isn't, you just skipped a step. That first year nitrogen situation also tells you what to plant while the bed is settling in. And this is a nice little trick that turns the weakness into a strength. Since a new mound is short on nitrogen at first, that's the year to plant things that don't need much of it. Or better yet, things that make their own. Beans and peas pull nitrogen right out of the air and fix it into the soil through their roots. They're close to the ideal first-year crop on a fresh mound because they'll thrive right where a leafy feeder would sulk, and they leave the ground a little richer for the next year in the bargain. Potatoes do fine that first season too, and so will squash and pumpkins sprawling over the top. Save your heavy nitrogen feeders, your cabbages, your broccoli, your leafy greens, for the second year and beyond, once the wood has stopped taking and started giving. Match the plant to the year, and you'll barely notice the lean spell at all. You'll also hear these beds warm up and stretch your season. There's truth in that. But again, not quite for the reason that's usually given. A mound bed does tend to warm earlier in spring and drain better, but mostly because it's raised up, dark, and catching the sun. The same reason any raised bed warms faster than flat ground. The heat coming off the rotting wood itself is modest, and mostly early on. So yes, you might get planting a little sooner on a mound. Just don't expect the logs to run like a wood stove under your tomatoes all winter. Now, you might wonder, if this is such a good idea, why did most of us ever stop doing it? And the answer isn't a conspiracy, it's just tractors. Once farming mechanized, everything got built around flat, open ground a machine could roll straight across. A mound is an obstacle. Buried logs jam a plow. Flat fields let you cover more ground faster and speed one out. The old practice of building up hills of wood and soil didn't fail, it just didn't suit a steel wheel, so it fell out of fashion. For a backyard gardener working by hand, that particular trade-off doesn't apply, which is part of why the idea is worth a second look now. Alright, if you want to try one, here's how I'd build it. And for a small bed, it's a one-afternoon job. The best time to build one, by the way, is fall, which is handy, because that's exactly when you've got a pile of brush and prunings sitting there anyway, and it's cool enough that the heavy work won't wear you out. Build it in autumn, let it settle and soak up the winter rain and snow, and it'll be ready to plant come spring. Start right on top of the grass. You don't have to dig, though some folks scoop out a shallow trench first. Lay down your biggest, oldest, most rotten logs as the foundation. The more decayed the wood already is, the sooner the bed starts working, so punky old stuff is a gift here, not garbage. Then pack the gaps tight with smaller branches and twigs. You don't want big air pockets, because as they collapse the whole mound sinks and leaves you with craters. How big should it be? That's up to your back and your space. The old traditional mounds were tall, waist high, sometimes chest high, because the bigger the pile of wood, the more water it holds and the longer it lasts. But you don't need to go that big to start. A mound a couple of feet high will do real work, and it's far easier to build and to reach across. You can always go bigger once you've seen the thing work for yourself. A word on which wood, because it matters. Oak, maple, birch, most common hardwoods and old fruit woods are ideal. They break down at a nice steady pace. Steer clear of two things. First, black walnut. It carries a natural compound called juglone that stunts a lot of garden plants, so leave it out. Second, any pressure-treated or painted lumber. You do not want those chemicals leaching up into your food. And I'd skip the naturally rot-resistant woods like cedar and black locust too, not because they're poisonous, they're perfectly safe, but because they resist rotting, and rotting is the entire point here. You want wood that's eager to break down, not wood built to last. Once the wood's stacked, pack every crevice with those nitrogen-rich greens we talked about, grass, manure, scraps. Then cap the whole thing with a solid foot of topsoil and compost, mulch it well, and water it in thoroughly that first year to get the wood good and saturated so the rotting can start. After that, you plant it like any other bed. One more thing worth knowing before you plant it. A mound isn't wet evenly top to bottom, and you can turn that to your advantage. The top of the mound is the driest, best drained spot. That's where the drought-tolerant plants belong. Your herbs, your rosemary and thyme, the things that hate having wet feet. The lower sides and the base stay damper because that's where the water settles, so that's where your thirstier crops go, your lettuces and greens and squash. Plant with the mound's own moisture map instead of against it, and everything sits a little happier for it. Now, I know some of you are looking at all this talk of hauling logs and stacking mounds and thinking, that's a young person's project, Cal, and I hear you. The building is the heavy part, no way around it. So two things. First, there's no rule that says you build it alone in a single day. This is a fine job to hand to a strong grandkid or a neighbor looking to lend a hand, or to do a little at a time across a couple of weekends. The work is all up front. Once it's built, a hugel bed is one of the lowest effort beds you'll ever tend, which is exactly the point for those of us who'd rather not spend every summer evening fighting the hose. Second, you can shrink the whole idea right down. You don't need a great tall mound to get some of the benefit. Throw a layer of branches and twigs in the bottom of an ordinary raised bed before you fill it with soil, and you've got a low, easy version of the same thing, wood down below, quietly holding water. Some folks even do it in big pots, a few broken sticks in the bottom before the potting mix, and the pot dries out slower between waterings. Start at whatever size your body and your yard will allow. The principle works the same whether it's a chest-high terrace or a handful of twigs in a planter. Now let me tell you the things the glossy version leaves out, because I'd want a neighbor to tell me straight. These mounds settle, and I mean a lot. A bed you build waist-high this year may be knee-high in 2 as the wood compacts and breaks down. That's normal. Just plan on topping it up with soil now and then. Second, all that loose woody structure underground makes a cozy home for mice and voles, especially over winter. Packing plenty of soil between the layers as you build helps, and the settling closes up their tunnels over time, but keep an eye out. And third, I said it already, but it's worth saying twice, that first year is the hard one, with the nitrogen tug of war. If you're going to lose faith in this, it'll be then. Push through it. And don't let anyone tell you it's hands off from day one either. That first year, while the wood is still soaking up its fill, You do have to water it like any other bed. The self-watering part comes later, once the logs underneath are saturated and the whole thing is settled in. Front load a little patience, and the bed pays you back for years. So the honest bottom line on never water, never feed again? Closer to the truth is, water and feed a good deal less after the first year or two in a normal rainfall year. That's still a fine deal, it's just not magic, and your climate gets the final say. A mound that practically waters itself where summer rain is common will still need your help in a genuinely dry summer. So here's what I'd actually do, and it costs you nothing but an afternoon and the wood you were about to burn anyway. This fall, before you light that brush pile, build one small mound in a corner of the garden. Bury the wood, pack the gaps with green stuff, cap it with soil, and plant it come spring, beans or potatoes that first year, while it finds its feet. Feed it and watch it through that first season, and then start paying attention to how often you reach for the hose on that bed compared to your others. Try it on that one small patch before you go rebuilding the whole garden around it. It won't end drought in your backyard, and it won't grow lemons in the snow, but it'll turn a pile of wood you are going to burn into a bed that holds its own water and gets a little richer every year you leave it be. That's not a miracle, it's just letting the garden do more of the work. I'll see you next time.